feelings are not facts. I'm not going to negate your feelings. Those are real. But we cannot lie to ourselves and say that what I feel is factual, no matter how strong the feeling. And that's a huge point when it comes to diabetes, because diabetes is not an emotional condition, but we are emotional beings. And that's the reality. We have to manage our emotion around a condition we never asked for. Otherwise, that condition is going to wreak havoc in our life. And I know it's done it for me before. It's probably done it for you before too. In either an acute sense, like with a temporary, you get really frustrated, you just rage bolus or you just rage eat, or in a chronic sense where you just truly believe this condition is just ruining your life, So
welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode.
All right. What's going on? Happy Monday night. Welcome to the first ever live streamed Your Diabetes Insider podcast. This is going to be fun. And I have a great guest. You may know him. Major member in the diabetes community, does a million different things. Great friend of mine. Very honored to call him a good friend. And that would be the one and only Chris Ruden. We will bring him in and let's have an awesome podcast. If you have questions, ask away. There is a live chat. I'll be keeping track of them, and we will try to answer as much as we can in the Q&A section towards the end, but we'll drop knowledge in the meantime. Let's bring Chris. What's going on, Chris?
what's going on, man?
This is wild. I've never done this, but I'm like, this is a little reflect.
I was watching, I was like, man, I hope he doesn't say anything ridiculous because he's live and I was backstage, so I couldn't warn you. I'm like,
Well, I thought about it. There were a couple of things I was like, I could do this, but I don't want to throw him under the bus this early in the process.
all good. It's all good.
No, I'm hyped. We're here. Again, this is just a wild experience, like the Wild West out here. But tell me, and if people don't know you, some people may know you, some people may not, because you're one of the OGs in the diabetes community. But if someone doesn't know who you are, tell them, Chris Ruden, who are you?
I am a professional speaker by trade. I was on the TV show Titan Games with The Rock. I've been in a bunch of magazines and stuff, but as a professional speaker, it's my job to help people see their world without limits. I've been type 1 diabetic for, I don't even know, 14 years now, 15 years. And for 20 years, I hid my disability, born 2 fingers on my left hand and a shorter left arm. And now it's my job to help people, whether they're in the diabetic community or not, focus on the life that they want and disrupt the barriers that stop them from experiencing quality of life. Wrote a few books, and all of that stuff is cool on paper, is really nice. But at the end of the day, I love being able to enjoy my life regardless of my condition or my disability.
And with that too, you've inspired so many people, both in the diabetes world, the disability world. We could go on and on for probably 20 minutes of all the different things you've done. And the number of people you've inspired is crazy. But a lot of the stuff I know that you talk about is overcoming limiting beliefs. And within the diabetes world, I see it every day. You see it every day. Probably anybody watching this live or listening later on has thought about this, but there's a lot of things where people think, hey, I have diabetes. I can't do blank. I can't build muscle. I can't drop pounds. I can't do fill in the blank A1C that I really want to have. What would you say to someone who's really struggling in a situation like that, where they've just for years and years been told no, or it gets to the point where they believe that they truly cannot do something?
So I did talk about this in my latest book. It's called The Art of Changing Course. And I'm obsessed with change, But to change, you have to give yourself hope or a chance to change. I was the same way. When I was diagnosed, I believed all of the can'ts. I can't eat pizza. I can't have orange juice. I can't have all these things that I couldn't do. And I hated it, but I just accepted it, until I stopped being as certain and started being more curious. And I think that's such a huge mental shift, a new mental model, if you will. If you looked at your condition or any part of your life, but specifically diabetes, and instead of having certainty with what you couldn't do, starting to develop curiosity as to how you might be able to. Instead of saying, I can't go out with my friends because I have diabetes, asking yourself, how might I be able to go out? What could I do to make that situation more comfortable for me? What could I do if I wanted to have that slice of pizza? It doesn't mean I want to teach you how to eat pizza as your only food forever for the rest of your life. We have those extremists, But what happens if you developed curiosity to adapt and find different ways that might not be normal to most people, but maybe it works for you? Replacing certainty with curiosity helps people innovate their own lives or their own diabetes so that it goes from I can't to I found a way that I could.
Which I think is huge, because I tell people constantly, patients we work with, people I'm interacting with, that instead of absolutely no, it's watch me, or, hey, this is why I do it. This is, why not me? My friend's not eating pizza. He has diabetes. He doesn't think he can do it. Why not me? Why can't I figure out how to do it? Why not be that one person that does figure it out? And I think these beliefs just originate so deeply. And I'd be curious, even in your own life, you've experienced this, I've experienced this. Where do you think they came from? Do you think it's from the constant, the physicians, the other members of the care team early on saying, you're done. Nope, you have diabetes. You're not playing sports. You're not doing this. Or do you think it's family? Do you think it's just well-meaning other people?
I think like any problem, it's usually multifaceted, which makes it a lot harder to deal with. So let's take my story, for example, I can at least speak to what I know. I was told by so many people what I could and couldn't do, and what I should and shouldn't do. And when something is repeated over time, you come to believe it as fact. But it's not always fact, because why was I told this? Was it out of fear? Let's be honest. There are some healthcare practitioners that use fear as a tool to create adherence. If I make you from a young age fearful of carbohydrates, you will grow up not eating carbohydrates. And chances are, by removing something, you will make it easier to manage your condition. I'm not arguing for or against carbohydrates because I'm a big carbohydrate fan, but I'm saying you'll never get into a car accident if you never leave your house. And that is the philosophy I think a lot of people take, is I can help you manage your condition by ruining your life. Maybe not that extreme, but I can help you manage your condition by making you scared to do things that you enjoy, all at the expense of just a number, And I think those limiting beliefs come from people we trust, and we believe because we trust them, we should trust them unconditionally. And that's the big distinction. At a certain point, it is your responsibility to unlearn the things you might have been taught that are stopping you from growing.
And that I was going to say that hit deep. That's when I was going to say, you need that word from the plug, literal. Because right there though, it's the unconditional aspects. I feel like we all filter information all the time. Or watch TV, you listen to the radio. People listen to the radio anymore. You're streaming stuff. You have conversations with people that whether you like them or not, but you're always filtering information. But certain people you're always going to take as the gospel. And I feel like the ones that we love and we care about the most are going to be the ones that leave the deepest. So if you're 7 years old, or, in my case, I was 7 when I was diagnosed, I was told early on, hey, it's your birthday. You don't get the cupcake. And I had that every single time, repeatedly, for all of 2nd grade and for a good chunk of 3rd grade. And suddenly at that point, I'm told that's it. And now I think that's normal. And I start to believe cupcakes are no good. Can't have cupcakes. That's a problem. And I think it's because of who was telling me, right? My teachers, my parents, my doctor at the time, who, separate conversation, not the best practitioner, but that can hit really deep and that can stick with you for years if you're not careful. So really taking that time to look inward, if you have a belief about your diabetes, and say, where did this originate from? And how can I change that narrative? And I feel like if anybody's going to talk about the changing narrative, it would be you in that case. So like you mentioned, though, why not me aspect of things. What would you tell someone if there's this one takeaway from this little section? What would be the one takeaway for someone who really wants to make a change and it's been really hard for them to get momentum and get going?
Let's start with a simple yes or no question. Are you happy with the way you think about your condition? Not with the condition itself. Are you happy with the way you're managing your condition? Do you feel the way you talk about your condition or the way you have to live your life with your condition is helpful or hurtful? If it's helpful, you don't need any advice from this podcast right now. No. If it's hurtful, then maybe you should keep listening. maybe there's something there. If there's room for change or you want a change, then we have to start asking those questions. Where might it have come from? Because we'll never know, but where might it have come from? Do you still align with the beliefs that were instilled with you as a kid or as a young adult? At a certain point, are you just reliving the beliefs of dead people, tradition, or are you reliving the beliefs of people that those beliefs no longer serve you? Or maybe they never did. I want you to at least create an environment where you're inquisitive, not doubtful or cynical, but inquisitive to say, wow, I don't really like the fact that I'm terrified of carbs. I don't really like the fact that I'm terrified of complications. I don't really like the fact that I feel like I'm always walking on eggshells. Okay, that's great, because change can start when we identify something that we don't really like. Now we can say, okay, how might I think about this differently? What strategies could I implement? That's where we start the journey of actually changing. There has to be a reason to change. Unless it gets thrust upon you externally, for you to change internally, you have to make that decision. And you have to get curious enough to make that decision in the first place.
And I feel like you have to question if you've lived a certain way. Like if you live with diabetes for 8 years and you've never changed anything, why? And like you said, if you're content with the status quo, by all means, keep doing it. But you can't in one breath say, I'm not happy with how I'm living. I'm not happy that I can't eat carbs in your mind. And then suddenly be like, I'm going to keep doing it. Like, then we're going to be having the same conversation 10 years from now. So that's the biggest thing. You have to have that impetus from within to say, hey, this is what I want to be doing. This is how I need to approach it. And just that little tiny shift of thinking differently, I think will make a massive difference. Diabetes or not, but within the frame of diabetes, this is imperative. And it's why I tell people constantly, until you change the mindset around it, you're not going to get the physical changes. You're not going to get the 6.0 A1C. You're not going to drop 20 pounds, whatever the goal may be.
If you're convinced that you can't do something and you are closed off to any other possibility, there is no room for growth or change or anything like that. And I know what that feels like, because I've told myself that story. When I hid my disability, I told myself I could never show my hand. And on being on the other side of it now, I'm like, oh, that was dumb or whatever. It wasn't dumb, because I truly believed that. And when you believe something, no one is going to shake that belief. No one is going to tell you otherwise. You have to be the one to tell you otherwise. And it's not that you have to have the answer. You just have to stop pretending like you know the answer. Because right now, a lot of people, including myself with certain aspects, we lie to ourselves and we say, I know this is it. I know this is final. I know I can't do anymore. I know it'll never get better. I know. And you have to realize it's not that you know it won't get better. It's that you feel it won't get better. And feelings are not facts. I'm not going to negate your feelings. Those are real. But we cannot lie to ourselves and say that what I feel is factual, no matter how strong the feeling. And that's a huge point when it comes to diabetes, because diabetes is not an emotional condition, but we are emotional beings. And that's the reality. We have to manage our emotion around a condition we never asked for. Otherwise, that condition is going to wreak havoc in our life. And I know it's done it for me before. It's probably done it for you before too. In either an acute sense, like with a temporary, you get really frustrated and you just rage bolus or you just rage eat, or in a chronic sense where you just truly believe this condition is just ruining your life, So I really want to free people from the certainty aspect and create more curiosity to have just a slightly better time.
I feel like it will end up more than slightly better if they truly embrace that, but it's so difficult to actually get to that point. And so be patient with yourself. If you're starting to question or you're like, hey, I don't really know how I feel about this, but I don't like this part of my management, start to get inquisitive, like Chris said, but then take your time. Don't feel like you have to figure it all out in 10 minutes or an hour or whatever. It can happen as a process over weeks or months, just like anything else you're trying to accomplish. And as you get more open to the idea, at some point, the light bulb turns on and boom, you have this massive epiphany. And with that too, right? I know that a lot of these principles can be incorporated with building muscle, weight loss, which are two areas of diabetes that, for being real, a lot of people are firmly in belief that they just cannot do. And you obviously have a, competitive powerlifting background. You've set a lot of records. When it comes to building muscle, what would be a couple of your top things for people who want to achieve that, throughout the holidays? My God, you could take full advantage of all the food that's going to be around. But in general, what would be a couple of your biggest takeaways for people on building muscle with diabetes? Because a lot think it's not possible.
Nothing seems possible at the beginning because so many of us, including myself, we look at the end result as the first step. We say things like, I want to build 10 pounds of muscle. Then you being a registered dietitian, CSCS, all of this, what can I do in the gym that will help me build 10 pounds of muscle
Right now, in this exact instant.
right now? When I go to the gym for an hour, I want to build 10 pounds of muscle. You know that's impossible.
Of course, God, if we could do that, we would be trillionaires right now.
I would also be the size of an apartment building, be huge. Because we want that end result so bad, every step before that end result is failure to us. Think about this. Like, I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to lose 10 pounds. You go to the gym one day, didn't lose 10 pounds. You go to the gym for 3 weeks, didn't lose 10 pounds. You go to the gym for 4 months, didn't lose 10 pounds. How many times did you lose? You lost. In your mind, you seem like a failure because you never hit that goal. And I think that's part of the problem is so many people set goals of this big, grandiose like goal, and they never get it until you only get that goal once.
Yeah.
Finally get that goal. But how much of the time have you like discouraged yourself? Versus instead of saying, I want to lose 12 pounds, saying like, I want to go to the gym today. I want to lift heavier than I did yesterday. I want to complete my nutrition, goals today. I want to do this week with success for the plan I have. If we made goals more bite-sized and more manageable, people would stick to their goals more because the goal, if we shift away from the end result and we shift towards like the actual today process, you're going to win every damn day. Every day will be a win. And then you're amassing wins, which is amassing confidence to keep going, which is just putting you on track to get there. Like whether you are walking to your refrigerator or you're running the Boston Marathon, both of them involve a single step, maybe different pacing, but a single step repeated over time. If you break things down to manageable positions, whether it's building muscle or losing fat, whether it's managing your condition or diabetes, yes, there are things you need to do. Progressive overload. You need to be in a calorie deficit. You need to make sure you manage your insulin on board. Yes, but at a certain point, if we broke it down digestibly, you need to do something towards that goal. No amount of thinking will fix that, and overthinking, we're just like, oh, but I have to do this. I have to do that. No amount of overthinking will fix overthinking.
And to that point, right, I feel like so many people will say, I want to do all these things, and they'll find like 15 things to do, and they'll try to do them all at the same time. And I will tell them 2 or 3, pick 2 or 3 little things. That's your process. That is your goal. Like you said, maybe it's go to the gym, hit my protein target, and I don't know, make sure that I'm dosing on time at lunch. Do those 3 things. Cool. Did you do them today? Yes or no? That's it. No, you didn't do them. What caused you to not be able to do them? Or you did them. Amazing. Congratulations. That's awesome. Let's do it again tomorrow. Let's do it again the 3rd day. Suddenly you're 7 days in. Let's add a new thing because dosing at lunch now became easy. And that's how you start stacking those wins. You put the brick today, the brick tomorrow, the next day, and suddenly you look up and you have a skyscraper, but it's going to take time. But focusing on the process will get you to the outcome. Focusing on the outcome is going to leave you disappointed.
Yeah, every single time. And that's with anything. Like, that's why diabetes really taught me, same thing with fitness and just like going to the gym. It really taught me like, oh, you have to take a more consistent approach instead of a more intense approach. You can't just take more insulin today to manage your condition better for life. You have to do that every single day. You have to manage your condition every single day and break that down even more. You don't have to manage your condition every day. You have to manage your condition every moment. And you can only have one moment at a time. So if you manage it in the moment, you're going to be good. And if you continue to manage in the moment, you're going to be good. Stop overwhelming yourself with all of the possibilities and give yourself a little bit of a mental health break and focus on what is happening right now. Make the best decision in the moment. How much better would your life be if you made better decisions in the moment? I know for me, it'd be a million times better. I try and do as good as I am willing to in the moment, but things do happen. Trust me, I'm not perfect whatsoever. I'm not this well-oiled, optimal machine, but I can teach you from what I've done correctly and what I've done, and I wish I would have done better. So the best way to learn is from other people's mistakes or other people's successes, but don't go through all the struggles I did just to be like, oh, you were right. Try and take advice from people who have been there so you can learn without the same pain that we've had to go through.
And on top of that too, actually doing on top of that, right? If you want to get good at anything, diabetes, nutrition, whatever, speaking, right? You have to actually do it and you have to actually get repetitions with it. So if you're thinking every time I do anything active, my blood sugar tanks, you need to continue doing things and making changes every time until you find that point where your blood sugar doesn't tank anymore. Because otherwise, it's just going to be this, I'm scared of this. I'm afraid of carbs. Every time I eat carbs, my blood sugar goes to the moon. If you don't eat carbs, you're not going to have opportunities to be able to try different things to figure out what your body needs specifically to handle those carbs appropriately. Whether that's, dosing on time, whether that's counting the carbs differently, whatever that thing is. And that I think is the biggest issue. So people, you have to, of course, learn from, my mistakes, learn from Chris's mistakes, learn from other mistakes who are, qualified in the field, but also know that you have to do things because just because you do it the same way I did, you say, hey, Ben, did you take 5 units for that meal? I could take 5 units, but you might not need 5 units because you're not me. We're different people. We have different insulin sensitivity. We have different carb ratios. It's going to be a different story.
I think that individual approach is like super important. I always say there's no universal fix for an individual problem, but you do have to try and you have to not give up on yourself. I think the best resource or the best belief you can develop is a belief in your ability to continue trying, to continue learning. If you consistently try and learn how to do better for yourself, don't lie to yourself and say, I'm trying my hardest. So many people say I'm trying my hardest, but when I ask them what they've been doing that qualifies as trying your hardest, not often trying their hardest. It's trying a little bit, maybe in a certain area. I think we all know we can put a little bit more effort towards pre-bolus. So let's be real. I think we can all put a little bit more effort towards checking our blood sugars, even if it's with a CGM, if they report every 5 minutes, we can all do a little bit better with being more on top of our condition and being more on top of our life and our mental health and all of these things. Don't deny that we can do a little bit better. Give yourself a chance to do a little bit better. But if you tell yourself, I'm trying my hardest, you just removed all of the responsibility from yourself from ever actually trying harder.
Man, I need that air horn again. There's some bangers on this. This is wild. But the reality is you have to take ownership over it. And you can't be like, oh, I did the best I could. Ask yourself, did you really? Did it actually happen in that way? And similar note to the CGM. And I'm curious, I'm pretty sure some people are going to be curious that are watching. What systems are you on? Because I know, like, for example, which CGM are you on a pump? Are you on MDI? Because everybody does it differently. And there's different examples of people doing great on, injections versus pumps. And so I'm just curious right now, which systems you're on.
Man, I feel like I get just bullied online because I'm not on a pump and I haven't been on a pump for years. I love technological advancement. Don't get me wrong. And I know it works so well for people. I'm just personally not on a pump right now. I take, ultra rapid acting insulin and long acting. That's what I prefer, but I am on a CGM. I'm on a different kind of CGM. So I'm on Eversense and it's now a 365-day sensor, which is pretty cool. So I can, take it off, which is pretty sweet. And I can put it back on because it's implanted and I change it once a year. So with traditional CGM, I used to change it, once every 10 to 14 days. Now I change it once a year and it's super accurate. I personally love it, but that's my choice. And that's what I love about diabetes in the space right now is we get to choose. And we've made this weird transition from patients just followed whatever the doctor said to now patients are advocating for themselves. And I love that. In seeing that as a person who's in the diabetes space for a long time, it's so cool to see patients take back their rights and take back what they want to do. I tried so many different things. I tried almost every technology that's out there, from inhaled insulin to every kind of pump, every type of CGM. And this is the system that's working for me right now. I have hopes for the future and all kinds of stuff, but right now I'm really happy with it,
And I feel like the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway for that for people listening, because they may know, may not know, I've been on Tandem. I flip-flop between Tandem and Omnipod, whichever one's making me less angry is the one that I'm on. Yeah. Because I have lots of issues with sites. And again, very well documented. But ultimately, it's about what is best for you, the individual. It is not about what's best for me, what's best for you, Chris. It's about whatever's going to work for your body. And if you're like, hey, I love being on injections. I know I'm getting my insulin. I don't have to worry about a bad site. By all means, run it. I've done the injections only route for 7-8 months a few years ago. I loved it. It was absolutely amazing. But there's obviously perks of a pump, the algorithms, etc. But it's about finding what is best for you. And even then, if I say I'm on an Omnipod, people say, oh, are you on the 5? I'm on the Dash and I use the DI loop and I love it. And it's amazing for me, but that's what works best for me. It doesn't mean it's going to be the best thing ever for you. And the Eversense, I am very excited with the possibility, now that it's at 365, but the possibility of integrating with, hopefully, some of the pumps, that would be
Yeah. I mean, that what I love, and I've said this for years, is competition drives innovation. So that innovation just benefits us as patients. You know, as a patient, I'm like, this is great for us because 10 years ago, we didn't have new, you know? So I support whatever works for you in the moment, you know, in the sense of could switch and go from pumps to not pumps or certain pumps to other pumps or whatever that looks like. And it doesn't make you a bad diabetic. It just makes you like honest, you know? Why are we so busy trying to force ourselves to be a person? Like you are not a person who has XYZ pump. You're just bed. Right. And that can change at any time in the sense of what you choose to do. You know, like what you have, your products, your A1C, any of that doesn't define who you are. It's just a part of the condition that we have. So I think it's important to distinguish between the two.
Yeah. And I think with that too, your comment of 10 years ago, I'm thinking, I think I just got a CGM about 10 years ago. And now there's the Libre, there's the Eversense, there's Dexcom, there's all sorts of different stuff. And just not only is the innovation just continuing, but how the hell did I go 14 years without even having access to a CGM? Because they just didn't exist. Right. My first meter I'm trying to find a good example, but like, it's probably this big, like, I don't know, like the gigantic Samsung phones, but like 10 times thicker and took a minute to read. And now we've got, oh, if it's faster or slower than 5 seconds, we're complaining and having a shit fit. Yeah. Unbelievable. Also unbelievable how our expectations changed through it. You told me when I was like 10 years old, oh, I'm going to have a thing that reads every 5 minutes. I'd be like, that's amazing. This is great. And now I'm like, this thing didn't read for 20 minutes. What's wrong?
Yeah. I think we do need to check expectations a little bit. Like, I think it's the dichotomy is we want to continue pushing these companies forward to do better for us. But at the same time, we have to remember where we came from too. I think both are true, you know, but let's be real. This condition can be a nightmare sometimes. Like it was like 2 nights ago where I just kept going. Well, if I ate one more pack of gummies, I swear to God, like where I'm just like, I'm going to vomit. I don't want any more carbs. I'm done. I am done. And that happens. It happens to the best of us. I'm sure stuff like that still happens to you. Diabetes is diabetes at the end of the day. And I think it's important to separate yourself from your condition. Otherwise, you will judge yourself based on the random happenings or the missed moments from the condition. And that I've seen it wreck people. Just they've decided that the worst of their blood sugar is now who they are as a person. And that sucks. You know, that's terrible.
It's depressing, but also it permeates into everything else because you're allowing your blood sugar that you are also defining. Granted, is it an amazing thing to be at, 225? No, but you're taking that 225 and making that influence everything else that happens the entire rest of your day. Right. Yep. Is not bueno. And on I guess a similar vein to that, right? Trickiest blood sugar situation you've come across recently. You mentioned the low blood sugar evening. Like, what would be another example of one that you've gone across? Just because we're talking about this as people with diabetes, but we're all, like you mentioned, we're human, right? I went through sites in 3 hours a couple of weeks ago because none of them were working. And I felt like,
yeah, I get that. For me, because I'm not on a pump, I miss things like dual wave, square wave, bolus, and 10 basals. Like I miss that kind of stuff. And my issue is always like highs in the middle of the night. And I'm like, is it dawn phenomenon? Is it the food I'm eating? Like, is it a combination of the two? And there was a good 3-week period where I just kept waking up at 200, or I wouldn't wake up at 200. I would wake up in the morning and I had been high the whole night, from 3 to 8 a.m. And I'm like, what the hell? What is going on? And it's definitely a frustrating thing that I'm doing better now, but I'm limiting the food choices at night. I found that steak was one of them, something late at night that I try and control, but it's still frustrating because I also want to live my life my way, And what's the give and take between living your life fully how you want and having to make certain compromises to live the life that you should,
And to that point, right? Like you mentioned the steak, there's times where if we go out to dinner, like I'll know, okay, that fat and protein is going to come back. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. I can count on one hand the number of times it didn't. And every single time coincided with like an 8-mile hike. So I'm going to the assumption that I was a little depleted those days, but the rest of the time it's going to come back. And so then I decide, okay, fat's going to hit. It's probably going to hit in 4 to 5 hours. If I'm exhausted, I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to get up at, let's just say 2:30 in the morning when it's been 5.5 hours. If I'm rising, I go do what I need to do for dosing. And if I'm not, then maybe I set another hour beyond. Cause again, I've had times where I'm slightly early and it hits a little bit later, and waking up at that number is just brutal. So I feel like diving in the way you did, right? With a practitioner, your care team, someone you trust, to say, hey, this is what could be happening. Could it be dawn phenomenon? Could it be the fat and protein? Could it be your basals off? Could it be something else that happens at that time that needs to get addressed? And maybe you overtreated a low. You have to look at the full picture and be able to say, okay, based on this, what information am I going to be able to use that I can apply for the next instance? And every day, is another opportunity to improve what's going on.
Yeah, that's the important part, is to see all of the options. Even as you were talking, you were listing some options that I wasn't thinking about. So it's like, you have to talk to people, whether it's people in your community or your care team, to figure out like, what could I be missing? That goes back to the beginning of this conversation. Curiosity to learn, even you saying options like, recovering from a low, that could be like causing a lot of, there's so many pieces to this puzzle sometimes. And it's not something to get overwhelmed by, but it is something to take note of. What might I be missing? And I appreciate you sharing that. It's one of those, like, I've always been, well, not always, the last like 10 years of my life or 8 years of my life, since I stopped hiding my hand, since I like decided to fully just embrace who I am and not the conditions I have. I'm like, how can I live the version of the life I want to live and not live according to the barriers that have been put upon me, whether by society or by like my condition?
And I feel like with it too, right? With all of it is knocking the barriers down, making the active choice to not deal with the barriers at all and have to deal with them. And then say, hey, what can I do to make life better? Yeah, really. And making it that simple and that cut and dry, I feel like is the biggest thing. And to feed off a point you made probably like 45 seconds ago, when you were like, hey, the overtreating the low, a lot of times if you trace things back, and this is something that I constantly with patients I'm talking about, they're like, hey, I had a high at, I'm making this up, midnight. And then I'd see there's the low before, then there was a high before that. So you're tracing that high from midnight. If you have a trained eye, someone, like, hi, like me, I'm looking back at like 4 p.m., 3 p.m. and say, okay, that is what led to your midnight high.
Wow. Yeah. It's crazy. Not going that far back.
Like sometimes it's 12 hours beforehand and people are like, why am I waking up at, this low blood sugar? I'm like, it's your dinner's fault. And they're like, wait, Chris, it goes all the way back there. And a lot of times, again, care teams, you go to they look at your numbers for 10 minutes, you get one tidbit, nugget of info that's helpful. Cool. You're lucky, more so here's your script, move on. I really try to make sure that we pay. Those types of things are going to be the things that end up finding the root of the problem instead of just, slap 10% on here and you're good. Like that's usually not the answer that quick.
And that's so funny you said that, because I talk about that in my book too, like root cause analysis. If you go why deep enough, you'll usually get to the root of the problem and not just the symptom of the problem. And I use that philosophy in like so many areas of my life, but blood sugars, we usually just see it for what it is. We're like, I'm high, I need insulin, which yes, that's true. But why did I go high? And if that high happens all the time at that same time, there's a trend. And if there's a trend, I think that's where I usually stop thinking. So if you opened my mind to that just now, I would be like, oh, there's a trend, so I just have to look at that. And but the trend could be for 12 hours prior. It could be the tail end of the beginning of your day. And if it's that way, we're just treating the symptoms and not the root. It's like trying to fix the light in your car that says check engine soon instead of actually fixing the engine.
And it's not meant to overwhelm when I say, oh, it could, be 8 hours before or 12 hours before, but there are instances where that is truly the case.
Yeah.
And it's more so hey, don't just stop. You're like, oh, I think I'm there. It's like a dandelion. You pull out the top, it's going to grow back. You pull out the root, goodbye dandelion. So that's effectively the biggest thing. And I saw one comment in here that people are asking, and I was actually going to ask you anyway. craziest meal that once upon a time you thought would be a challenge for your blood sugar, but now you're like, I got it. This is good.
I think every meal now I can manage. And the only times I don't manage are when I'm lazy or mindless. And let's be real, it happens.
Yep.
Where lazy thinking is like, oh yeah, I'll get to that. And then you're like, okay. And then like, I'll bolus in a second. Like, then you watch a TV show and you're like 20 minutes in and you're like, your CGM lets you know like, hey bro, what are you doing? And you're like, you buckle up because the roller coaster is just like tick, 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 but I can fully bolus for a heavy pasta dish like penne alla vodka with chicken. And if you're having that at an Italian restaurant, let's be real, you're also having bread. And if you're having bread as the pre-appetizer, you're also having an appetizer, which is something like some sort of fried bread. Maybe that's just me. I'm eating a lot of carbs at an Italian restaurant. I've done very good with micro bolusing and setting myself up based on the carbs and fats. And that's something you taught me a long time ago, which was the intersection of carbs, proteins, and fats and how they stack or delay or a combination of those. So I suggest anyone, like I've been really good at managing most of my foods, again, unless human error, but it's because I've learned things from people like you. And it's so vital to go to people like you who are professionals to teach them the things that they don't know, because you cannot get better at things you don't know by doing things you don't know, because you don't know.
Yep.
The best way to shorten that learning curve or shorten the pain that comes from not knowing is to go to someone and have them actually look at the bigger picture. I know you've done it in front of me before too. You can see someone's like CGM graph, or you can see someone's management kind of results or consequences and be like, this is what's going on. And they might only see the end result. They might not see the bigger picture. And when you lay it out for them, they're like, how'd you know? And because you know how to interpret information and your patient's lifestyles and turn it into a solution. I think that's really cool to take something like penne alla vodka and be like, I can do that.
I was going to say the food, we went to Italy this past year for our 1-year wedding anniversary, and some of the food there, I would have never gone near with a 10-foot pole like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Out of fear.
Just straight up like, this will completely make my life absolutely terrible. I remember I think it was Amelia's birthday, because our wedding anniversary and her birthday are like 3 days apart, which amazing timing for her. She's going to have great birthday dinners forever, it seems like. But with that, like I had over 200 grams of carbs at that dinner, and I did not go above, I think, 150.
That's insane.
It was nuts. We ate, it was so, we had like 2 different tiramisus. Like it was like that. And I was like, I'm not holding back. This is so good. I'm not going to lose this opportunity. But again, figuring out what was in it, having the reps to know, I know how to figure this out. I know how to dose this. I know what the fat's going to do, and nailing it. My crowning achievement as a person with diabetes, there is none, right? You're constantly,
with diabetes. At the end of the day, we're not getting an award for that.
It's not like Ben ate 200 grams of Italian food and carbs. He did
Varsity Olympics, who has it more. And even then, you're not eating like that every day. But I think it's cool to have those tools so that you just go into situations more prepared.
Precisely. And again, to your point, I don't eat like that very often. Yeah. Her birthdays, all in our anniversary trip. Like, it's not like that's going to constantly be a theme, but to have the tools to say, hey, I'm going to do this and I feel confident doing it is a different story.
I think a good tool is like understanding how to use a hammer. You can put in a picture frame, or you can potentially start to build a house if you have the know-how, So you can decide how in-depth that tool is going to be used for the project you have at hand.
Yeah. I like that. Steal that one.
Good. I just made it up. So I'm glad that
was fantastic. That was absolutely, it's all about how you,
That's crazy that it worked. I was like, please, dear God, Alice usually gets me in trouble. Make this to make sense.
It seemed like it did the damn thing. And I do want to say I'm grateful for you coming on here and doing this. And I promised people that they would get to ask questions. Cool. Yeah. Let's see what questions we've got so far. Let's see. One of these would be, this is actually, I think, a really interesting one for you, is how long it took you to come to terms with the fact that your diabetes was with you for the rest of your life. That's a tough one.
It's really easy for me. And it's because I have a different situation.
Yep.
I got diagnosed with diabetes at 19 years old, and I almost immediately accepted it and ran with it. Not because I'm a superhero, but because I was still hiding my hand. At 19, my biggest concern was my hand. So diabetes was like, oh, no problem. That's fine. I don't have to hide it. I was so busy hiding my hand, and I continued to hide my hand for 8 years after that. Diabetes was like, oh yeah, I'll talk about diabetes, because then I can say, hey, look over here. Don't look at my hand. Just look over here. Look at the diabetes. Diabetes was a chance for me to pretend like I was confident. And that was, I think, good in a way, because I could manage my diabetes openly, but I was still struggling with something else. So while diabetes might have been painful at certain points, it wasn't as painful to me as my disability,
Yep.
And that's even during the height of the diabetes era. When was that? Like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, or longer? Me and Rob from Diabetic Doing Things were just talking about, like, we got the best era of diabetes, in my opinion. We were back in the day with like social media just starting and us being like type 1 diabetes community. It was super cool. I'm not saying it's not good now, but it was something.
Different animal.
It was a different animal back then. So even while I knew you, I was still hiding my hand and I was still struggling. But diabetes gave me an opportunity to help other people, which helped me help myself. So my situation is a little different, but I'm really glad that I was able to lean into it quickly.
And I think it's interesting to your point, because, in the case where you're like, hey, look here, it's always what's the distraction? It's look the other way. Something else is going on.
Yeah.
In my case, right, I was 7. I don't think I truly came to grips with it until I was 17. Like, it took me 10 years of just, because constantly, right, you're a kid, people are nasty. We're kids, and they're going to say stuff and it's going to bother you. And I took a lot of it to heart. I would hide it constantly. I would, dose in the bathroom. I would tell people I was lactose intolerant, even though I was eating cheese on things, which people they didn't question me. Went with it. But I didn't feel like explaining it and then potentially risking being ostracized. Like, if I was put in a group with people, I would not tell them a day. I'd hide my stuff across the room. Like, it was rough. And then ironically, 16, I was almost 17. And I went there and I was like, all right, maybe I am normal. And then I turned 17. I was like, I don't know if I care anymore. Like, I'm just going to be the human being that I am. And if you don't like me because of it, then adios. See ya. And I'm not going to say, oh, changed everything, but it really did. Because once I started to embrace it, the management became a lot easier because I wasn't so concerned with what other people thought. Yep. So it's an interesting perspective, and everyone's going to have their own timeline, right? Because I took 10 years. I was diagnosed as a kid. There are some people who get diagnosed as adults, and it's a different story. It's a different animal, and it's not going to be easier. It's going to be different. One may have lived 20 plus years of a certain normal life, and suddenly has to change everything that they're doing. And it may take them multiple years. It could take them decades. So it's really, again, just working on yourself and understanding, hey, am I going to allow this to define the human being that I currently am? One of these, this is a good one. How do you deal with your doctor when they only tell you how much insulin to take per meal, don't care what you're eating, and then prescribe your insulin?
Okay. How do you deal with a partner in a relationship who doesn't respect you, doesn't love you, and doesn't hear you out? You break up with them. At the end of the day, you have to remember, you don't work for the doctor works for you. If your doctor is not serving your needs, your doctor is not the only doctor. And I can damn sure tell you that doctor is not your doctor. Maybe on paper, but not in real life. Because anyone on my team has to have my back. Because I work too hard, and I'm sure you work too hard for your money and the time you spend away from your family to hire a doctor that doesn't give a, that's all I have to say about it.
Oh, it's 100% accurate. Like, I'm not saying, again, doctors have their limitations of, they might only be able to spend 15 minutes, but care in those 15 minutes. Like, if I was only giving 15 minutes to the patient, I'd be like, okay, what are the most important things we can accomplish, and how can we make sure you're set up for success? If they're not going into the appointment like that, peace. Or if they're at the very least not saying, go to a dietitian or diabetes edge here that can do the things that I don't have time to do with you.
Yes, build a plan if they can't carry it out on their own. I speak at so many different diabetes conventions all around the world every year. And I'm not saying that to like flex. I'm saying that because I've met some incredible doctors around our country, in other countries, depending on who's listening to this. I've met some doctors that I'm almost jealous that I don't see because they're so good. I know they exist. And like solutions, sometimes you have to look for them, but use your community to find them and see who else is good in your network or out of your network. There are always options. Just be curious enough to look for them.
I was going to say, and that's the key, is just not giving up because the first 2 or 3 people you talk with aren't suiting your needs. Like, they're built from somewhere.
That's jobs, and that's done.
Right. Like imagine that like you were like, oh, I'm going to go on 2 dates with 2 different people and I have to marry one of them. Like
That's great.
both suck, right? What if they're both just terrible? Then you feel like that's just not reality. If you need to go see 8 or 9 different people, it's not ideal, but at some point you will find the person that's going to be the person to help you. Where you and I are obviously, that was a very good question. I don't think I've actually ever been asked that one, believe it or not. All right. One person asked about the Eversense and what it was called. So I just mentioned Eversense again, but another question someone asked was the biggest tip for powerlifting and keeping your blood sugar in range because they may go high.
So I will speak from my perspective, and then I'm sure Ben, you'll hop in here too. But I have found that depending on what kind of power lifter you are, if we got into science, we'd say like I did what was called daily undulating periodization. So I did a lot of volume and a lot of frequency throughout the week. But because I did so much volume and frequency, I would warm up for a very long time. What I found is that during the warm up, I would tend to drop. I would slowly decrease because the warm up is pretty much low intensity, steady state. And with that, you tend to lower your blood sugar, increase in insulin sensitivity. But I would not eat carbs because as soon as I started my working set, if I was working above 75% of my 1 rep max, the intensity from that would cause a temporary spike. So it would level me out automatically. Sometimes it was scary to see it going close, but in time and repetition, I saw that would carry me up. Sometimes I would even need to micro bolus during my workout, depending on what intensity I was doing. Once I got over 90% 1 rep max, I would usually have to micro bolus during my workouts, and it would be cut severely. It'd be like 30% of what I normally take, so I don't crash afterwards. But I would always base what I was doing around diabetes management based on the intensity or heaviness of the lift for that day.
And that's the most important thing, I think, for powerlifting. As someone who never actually has competed in powerlifting, but I like to think I've put up a decent amount of weight at different times. The biggest thing is the heavier you're going to go and the less reps you're doing, the body's saying, liver, give me energy, give it now. And it's just going to absolutely just spit out glucose like nobody's business because you need all the max effort to lift. In your case, I want to say it was like 650 pounds or something.
675.
Close enough. I was close, but you get the idea, right? You're lifting this crazy amount of weight. Your body's saying, give me all the energy, give it to me now. Your liver's probably going to overshoot a little bit. Your number's going to go up as a result. Getting that insulin on the back end is also important because otherwise when that, that liver dump's done and you're walking around, you're living life, all that addition, probably adrenaline, right? All going to come crashing down, which is why you took less. But the biggest thing I can say is don't underestimate doing singles or doubles or even triples for lifting, like 1, 2, or 3 rep sets, because that stuff will spike you like crazy. And even start and stop things like sprints, right? I used to run tons of sprints. Once upon a time, I used to think I was pretty fast. But, at the same time, there were times I would be 70, 72, 68. I'd run 3 sprints and I would suddenly be 90 again because it's the same type of process. Max effort, short duration, going to dump glucose from the liver.
There's a really cool chart. If you look up JDRS peak blood sugar chart, it shows the different intensities and the different blood sugar trends based on intensities and types of exercise. I've used that chart for 15 years, 10 years when talking to people about like blood sugar management as it relates to like lifting heavy weight. I've always loved that representation. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, Ben, but it's a super cool chart. Yeah. And I just love that it shows the possibility. At the end of the day, diabetes, and we don't live in a vacuum. So like have insulin on board and you're going to work out and there's like a lot of factors. But in general, what we're talking about right now is how I've managed the blood sugars around powerlifting. Now with bodybuilding, I'm doing a lot more high volume, a lot more sub-max, a lot less sub-max. I tend to just drop during my workouts, So I usually have I try not to have insulin on board when I go to work out, or I have to have intra-workout carbs, one or the other.
And meanwhile, I'm the total opposite of you. I just sit flat when I lift.
That's why
I don't move at all. I also work out fasted most of the time, which is probably part of it, but I do that not because it's like, oh, it's easier for my blood sugar. I do it just because I'm like, it works in my schedule better and I'm lazy. Like it works. So you got to find what works for you. But in that case, I typically, like today I lifted, I started at like 106 and I stayed between 100 and 115 the whole time. And I was done. I'm like, cool, time to go eat. It'll be great. But that's, ultimately everyone's going to respond differently. So with that, I would say I feel like we've answered a lot of stuff. We've gone a lot of depth. This is good.
Got that response. Like, I hope whoever watches or will watch gets the value they need. And if not, I'm always available to talk, whether it's mental health or change or anything like that. Always feel free to shoot me a message.
Where can people message you to reach you?
At Chris Ruden, whether that's Instagram or LinkedIn or my website or emails. Instagram's probably easiest.
And if they want to potentially go nab your new book, what is that book called?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all major book retailers online. It's called The Art of Changing Course. So it's a really simple process to get unstuck in life. And it's very simple, but it's hard to stay consistent when you don't have help. And I truly consider this book as being the help that I wish I could have had for the changes I wish I could have made sooner in my life. So if you're at a point where you're wanting some sort of change, whether it's around diabetes or not, the concept of change supersedes all specific instances of struggle, because struggle is a universal thing. So if you find yourself wanting some sort of change, I really did write this book over the course of almost 2 years to help that exact reason.
So definitely go check that out. Holler at Chris. Obviously, get a hold of me if you have comments, questions, etc. If you're listening after the fact, at Man of Zeal. And if you're serious about getting your numbers in a better spot, my team and I may take your insurance. We're all dietitians. We all have type 1 ourselves, and we all have exercise backgrounds. So with that, Chris, I appreciate you as always. Definitely glad we got to chat. We'll be chatting soon. And then with that, peace.
See you guys.
Hope you're ready for the next episode. Hey.